Putin has issued an ultimatum, and this ultimatum is not only for Ukraine, but in fact for Trump as well. Ukraine's withdrawal from Donbas or the continuation of the war. What should be chosen? We will continue to analyze this situation with you and see how it all ends. Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. While you subscribe to our channel and hit the like button, I'll tell you all the details of this story. So let's start from the beginning. Recently, America developed a so-called peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. The author of this plan is allegedly a close associate of Donald Trump, his special representative Steve Witkoff. According to unofficial versions, he was assisted in writing this very plan by another special representative, but this time for Putin, Kirill Dmitriev. So as you can see, Ukraine was excluded from this equation. This was developed without the participation of the Ukrainian side. And as a result, the terms of this plan were as unfavorable for Ukraine as possible. The plan consisted of 28 points, which could be conditionally divided into 4 categories: peace in Ukraine, security guarantees, European security, and the future relations between the US, Russia, and Ukraine. But more specifically, this plan was almost tantamount to Ukraine's capitulation. That is, Ukraine would have to give up Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk regions, the occupied territories, and reduce the size of its armed forces. Naturally, Ukraine responded harshly. The idea that the future of the country would be determined by the aggressor state or by anyone else without our participation after years of war and loss sounded like mockery. Kiev made it clear no document that envisions the legitimization of occupation, limitation of sovereignty, or any concessions to Russia will be acceptable. A wave of outrage over such a peace plan also arose in Europe. Since the initial peace proposals from the United States appeared to be heavily skewed in favor of Russia, new negotiations were held in Geneva between the American side and Ukrainian officials. As a result, a revised version of this plan emerged. The number of points in the peace plan was reduced by almost a third, from 28 points to 19. Now, the Russian dictator Putin has stated that the draft peace plan could serve as the basis for a future agreement to end the nearly 4-year-long full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. According to Putin, the Kremlin has received this document and is ready for further consultations. Putin also emphasized that there is no final text and that it is only a list of issues that could form the basis of a future document and negotiations. In his latest statements, Putin noted that he cannot speak about any final options at this time because they simply do not exist. But there are still certain things that are fundamental for him. Here, of course, it's not about international law, not about human lives, and not even about logic. His principles, strangely enough, always coincide with the map of Ukrainian territories that Russia has occupied and is destroying. The bunker grandpa stubbornly clings to what does not belong to him. The return of Ukrainian land, in his view, is obviously considered a violation of some of his sacred rights. For Putin, one of the key points in negotiations with the United States remains the demand to recognize Russian sovereignty over the annexed Crimea and the occupied Donbas. That is, to legalize what he has in fact done in violation of international law. That's his principle. If I took it, it means it's mine. And international recognition is important to him because then these territories can officially be considered Russian. And any attempts by Ukraine to reclaim them will be interpreted by the Kremlin as an attack on Russia, creating a convenient legal pretext for further aggression. Putin even expressed hope that in the future he would be able to come to an agreement with sensible people in Ukraine, that is, with those who would agree to accept his terms and formalize the occupation under the guise of long-term relations. But this is only the beginning of so-called peaceful, but as we know, false promises. Next, Putin stated that hostilities in Ukraine would only cease when the armed forces of Ukraine leave the territories they currently occupy. Well, everyone interpreted this as referring to the territories in Donbas. If Ukrainian soldiers do not leave the land on their own, then Russia will achieve this through military action, Putin said. He added that in the Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, and Kupiansk directions, Russian troops allegedly control a significant portion of the territory, and Ukrainian units have found themselves in a difficult situation. According to his assessment, fighting is ongoing in the city of Siversk in the Donetsk region. A significant number of buildings have already been taken under control, and the situation is not easy for Ukraine. However, the Ukrainian General Staff refutes this information. They only emphasize that the situation is indeed difficult, but there is no encirclement, let alone the capture of these cities by the Russian army. Moreover, in those same public appearances, Putin even invented a city that Russia supposedly occupied. There he mentions Komsomolsk within the Donetsk region, but there is no Komsomolsk in Donetsk region. The only Komsomolsk that existed on the territory of Ukraine until 2016 and is now renamed Horishny Plavny is located in Poltava region, 300 kilometers away from the areas Putin is talking about. But let's move on. Here in this video, the Russians destroyed a school building in the city of Siversk, supposedly because, according to their propaganda version, there was a temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is the wording they themselves spread in their propaganda channels. But there were never any Ukrainian troops in that school. This is direct evidence of how Kremlin propaganda distorts reality to justify destruction and portray occupation as a victory. According to the Russian dictator, by the way, here's what they wrote in their channels at the time to supposedly confirm their latest terrorist actions. So, according to Putin, in northern Ukraine, in Vovchansk, in the Kharkiv region, Russian troops almost completely control the city. In the Zaporizhia region, Russian groups are breaking through the defenses and rapidly advancing toward Huliapol. Of course, the dictator didn't forget to mention Ukraine's current political leadership. For some reason, they're always like a thorn in his side. He claims that supposedly it's possible to hold legitimate elections or make important decisions in Ukraine without manipulation and rigging. According to him, even a referendum on territorial issues, as stipulated by the Constitution, cannot be held legally, and having the results confirmed by the Constitutional Court is currently unattainable. We are very pleased that Putin is studying Ukrainian legislation and the Constitution in such detail. And on top of all this, we should add that the person lecturing us about elections is someone who has been sitting in the president's chair for more than 26 years, constantly changing the laws to stay there, and whose most recent elections, none of them, have been confirmed or recognized by the international community as democratic, fair, or unrigged. And it should also be emphasized here that Putin is a person who kills all his opponents because he is so afraid of competition, even in pseudo elections, that he cannot allow anyone else to even be registered there except for himself. But he emphasizes that the Constitutional Court refused to confirm the president's powers. The head of the Supreme Court is in prison for corruption, and most of the judges of the Constitutional Court have lost their authority. So, in the dictator's view, any political moves become legally complicated and drawn out. Indeed, if anyone is an expert in eternal rule, it's Putin. The dictator noted that only the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine has the right to extend its powers during martial law. Meanwhile, the president supposedly does not have this right. Putin claims that after martial law is lifted in Ukraine, it will be necessary to hold presidential elections, a referendum on territorial issues, and form a new constitutional court, a process that, in his opinion, will take too much time and will never be completed. Therefore, in his assessment, it is practically impossible to negotiate with Ukraine right now. And any decisions at all should be based not on Kyiv's position but on international recognition. Very convenient, especially when you've been running the country for so long that only those who entered politics with you can remember your first election. And, well, Putin also stated that Russia is supposedly ready to put in writing a promise not to attack European countries. In Moscow, the idea of a threat to Europe is considered a blatant lie. He called all these rumors ridiculous and unfounded. According to him, Moscow has never had such intentions, and any accusations of this are not true. And the people who claim that there is a threat to Europe from Russia are a bit out of their minds. The head of the Kremlin accused them of serving the interests of private defense industry companies in this way, or of trying to boost their domestic political ratings amid the allegedly dire state of the economy. So Putin is setting these conditions for peace. Ukraine must recognize Russia's gains on the Crimean Peninsula and in the eastern regions, withdraw its troops from these territories, and any agreement must receive international recognition instead of Kyiv's consent. In addition, he rejects the legitimacy of the Ukrainian leadership and therefore considers negotiations with Ukraine's leadership legally impossible. And finally, the dictator added that Russia is ready to discuss peace guarantees, humanitarian issues, and elements of strategic stability. According to him, an American delegation with Donald Trump's special representative Steve Witkoff may soon arrive in Moscow to discuss America's updated peace proposal. But now let's take a look at the reaction of the Europeans. Even the initial peace plan sparked a negative wave among European officials. France and Germany emphasized that the continent will not allow the map to be redrawn again without the involvement of the European Union. Poland and the Baltic countries directly called such a practice of bypassing allies dangerous and unacceptable. Now, after the updated peace plan, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen warned against the unilateral partition of a sovereign European state as Europe tries to assert its influence over the US attempt to end the war in Ukraine. She stated that Russia has shown no signs of genuine willingness to end the conflict. Pressure on Russia must continue. Ursula von der Leyen emphasized that it is essential to clearly understand that there can be no unilateral division of a sovereign European state and that borders cannot be changed by force. If today we legitimize and formalize the undermining of borders, we will open the door to new wars tomorrow, and we cannot allow this to happen. The president of the European Commission emphasized in turn, former Estonian Prime Minister and now the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, shared the views of the European Union's foreign ministers during hastily organized video calls. They reaffirmed their shared principles, namely sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and Ukraine's inalienable right to self-defense. Kallas noted that if Russia could conquer Ukraine by military means, it would have already done so. But Putin cannot achieve his goals on the battlefield. That is why he is trying to get there through these so-called negotiation tactics. The former Estonian Prime Minister also adds that over the past century, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries, some of them 3 or 4 times. Therefore, any peace agreement must focus on obtaining concessions specifically from the Russian side so that they permanently cease their aggression and do not attempt to change borders by force. European Union officials also oppose limiting the size of the armed forces of Ukraine. Such a limitation would make the country vulnerable to future attacks. And Ukraine also needs reliable, credible, and long-term security guarantees. And while the world is closely watching all of this, Putin is putting forward his ultimatums. Europe is believing less and less in his peace initiatives because behind the beautiful words lies the same old scheme: give up land, renounce sovereignty, agree to dictatorship. Europe already sees that the Kremlin is not seeking peace. It seeks to formalize its conquest. Ukraine, meanwhile, repeats what it has always said. No plan written in Moscow or with the participation of intermediaries will become the basis for negotiations if it is written without Ukraine. And as long as Russia bargains for territories instead of peace, the world has only one choice: to keep the agenda in its own hands or to leave it at the mercy of others. Let's see how this story with the 28-point peace plan ends and whether Ukraine's interests will be taken into account. And as soon as we find out what has been changed in this plan and what position Ukraine will take to the negotiations, we will immediately let you know. And to make sure you don't miss anything, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. See you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Please take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.